Hey, Mate 40 here. Just had a blinding insight right before I started the show. If you talk about victimhood, if you complain, right, one little bit more than I think is appropriate and right, then you're a marginalized loser. On the other hand, if you complain about right-wing victimhood one little bit less than I do, then you're in denial of reality and you're not willing to be honest. So that's my instinct, because I think we've all had the experience of listening to people that we agree with, all right? People on the right. Maybe you think that the 2020 election was stolen from Donald Trump, which I don't believe. But if you think that, all right, even you, there's going to come a certain point where you're tired of hearing about it, and it starts to become ridiculous from your perspective. Unfortunately, or fortunately, you can't have an intense in-group identity without simultaneously having an intense sense of victimhood, right? The stronger your Jewish identity, the more intense you'll have a sense of Jewish victimhood. There's no way around it. Now, there's only a way around it if you can play some intellectual tricks where you're able to experience all the joys and intensity of a strong in-group identity, but you're also able to step outside of it and have a highly measured response in the real world or when engaging in intellectual discourse, so that you don't just give in to your feelings of intense victimhood. But if you have a strong Jewish identity, you will, in all likelihood, have a strong, intense sense of Jewish victimhood, which you may not express publicly or socially in your essays or your live streams, because you're able to overcome it through doing a trick, such as stepping outside of yourself and becoming reflexive and wondering, how would this look like to other people? And so you can moderate your basic visceral impulses. But if you're operating from your basic visceral impulses and you have a strong in-group identity, whether it's as an Australian, a black man, a white man, a Chinese American, as a Muslim, as a Christian, right? You have that intense in-group identity, right? You will also have an intense sense of victimhood, right? If you're a man and you have a strong masculine identity, right, you're very likely to have a strong sense of how men are taken advantage of. And it becomes boring, right, to listen to people's victimhood tales. On the other hand, you can become so denying about your group's victimhood that you're essentially leaving behind those who are lower performing than you are. Right? So, for example, it's very low status as a white man to complain about anti-white discrimination. But there is anti-white discrimination. And the implicit white attitude seems to be, if you need to complain about anti-white discrimination, you're a loser. Okay, chat says, I think the more orthodox you are, the less the Jewish victimhood is at the forefront. I don't think so. The more orthodox you are, the less likely you are to speak to the wider world and to interact with the wider world, except in the most superficial of ways. And so your victimhood is not going to be as easily exposed. But if you're a strongly identifying Orthodox Jew, right, you feel every slight that Israel suffers, right? You are concerned about the businesses of people in your community and any bad breaks against their economic well-being, social well-being. You feel every slight that's directed at, in particular, your fellow Orthodox Jews, and you're a little bit outraged about it. So I have to talk about it more. But here's the other thing that ruffles my feathers. I notice invariably when I talk to right-wingers complaining about victimhood, almost invariably they don't have their own life together. In fact, they're incredibly passive. So my liberal left therapist pointed this out to me circa 2015. He said to me, do you think you are so radical and extreme in your politics because you're so passive in your real life? And I thought about it and had to admit it's right. And so people I notice who are outraged by right-wing victimhood, I notice they usually are not well launched into a career. Right? They usually don't have a thriving social life. Right? They're usually not taking care of family and friends. Sometimes, right? Sometimes they are. Sometimes I meet people who are taking care of a wife and children, and they're doing it responsibly. They are earning good money, and they still have a mentality furious about victimization. And that I've got all day for. Right? I can listen to that all day if it's usually, I think I can, if it's coming from someone who has a highly productive life. But if you're getting drunk a lot, if you're getting high a lot, if you're playing video games a lot, if you are spending way too much time on podcasts and blog posts and social media, instead of building a career, instead of assuming your proper role in the community, instead of even stepping up and volunteering in your community, looking after a wife and kids, getting a wife and kids, if you're not stepping up in life, but instead you're incredibly passive with taking care of yourself and with other people, right? If you don't take care of yourself, you're not going to be much use taking care of other people. So if you're passive in your own life, if you're failing to meet your adult responsibilities, if you're not stepping up to take good care of yourself, which therefore enables you to take good care of the people who you love, then I don't have much patience with intense right-wing politics, which will always come with it a sense of right-wing victimhood. So that's how I'm seeing things. Right, Kamala Harris is supposed to give her first interview soon. This is
the question
Commentary Magazine
is
podcast.
that the interview Dana Bash is prepping? And I think a lot is now riding on Dana Bash to ask substantive questions of Kamala Harris. Mainly, in my view, questions that would deal with where she stands on key policies. And has she actually changed her mind on these policies, such as Medicare for All, the Green New Deal, decriminalizing illegal immigration, gun confiscation, banning fracking? If she's really changed her views on these issues since 2019, when she ran for president last time, why? And I hope Dana Bash asks those questions. I know Kamala Harris doesn't want to answer them.
The interesting question in these cases is always why Dana Bash was selected, because obviously there are 200 people in Washington who would have been thrilled beyond measure to give this interview. And she, in fact, chose the least watched cable network, number one. And number two, could have had prime time on network at the snap of a finger. Lester Holt, George Stephanopoulos, David Muir, John Dickerson of CBS, Norah O'Donnell of CBS, at her whim, in prime time. She chose the least watched cable network. So it's not that they're exactly, you can't hide an interview like this. There's no way to do that. But to the extent that you could, she seems to be attempting to do that and to dilute her own presence with the presence of someone else. Now, Abe, does it matter, you as a critic of performance and a longtime pop culture viewer and all that, does it matter that she has a backstop there? Will the public look at this and say, why isn't it just her? What do I need him for? She could interview him at 9 o'clock or at 10 o'clock. Why do I need Tim Walz there? And I'm not sure that I know the answer to that, except I do know that most people will only see clips, and the clips will presumably mostly be of her talking to Dana Bash, so maybe it doesn't matter that much. I really do think this is a mark of weakness and not of strength, and that it's visibly a mark of weakness and not of strength. And she isn't so far ahead that she can show weakness like this, in her first public appearance.
It is definitely a mark of weakness, not of strength. What I'm not at all convinced is that people outside our precinct see it as a mark of weakness and not of strength. I'm certain the campaign thinks that what the American public wants more of is team joy. We're going to keep pushing team joy. The American people have a fever, and there's one prescription: more joy. And they want to keep the biographical aspect of this alive, the excitement over the new team, the emphasis on how this isn't Biden, and steer clear of policy and of policy change and explaining policy changes, I think you can forget it. I mean, I could be wrong. I mean, maybe Dana Bash could do something remarkable here and you know, like
Be a journalist.
Be a journalist.
She absolutely could.
I think she might. Look, she did a pretty good job at the debate between Trump and Biden.
Yeah.
And, you know,
No,
so
she's not.
there's no reason she can't ask a tough question. She's
She's not Hoda Kotb. I mean, she
totally
she's
not
not,
Gayle King, right?
Yeah.
Kamala's friend from CBS, who would have definitely done a softie interview.
But to John's point, to secure the interview with her when there were more obvious takers up the totem pole, maybe there's an understanding there.
Or there's
so
there is some background, which is Bash has interviewed Harris several times before. And I think with Harris, this is just, you know, gasbaggery on my part, but that's what I specialize in. I think with Harris, personal comfort matters a lot. Is she comfortable with another individual? And I think the history that she has with Bash kind of elevated Bash to the top, alongside John's very good point that this is not going to be hugely watched when it airs on CNN at 9 p.m. Thursday evening. Some of the clips might go viral. They might go viral for all the wrong reasons. We just don't know. I think a big element will be how will the interview be framed? If Bash asks the question, will we often see Harris alongside Walz, or will we have close-ups of just Harris? If it's Harris alongside Walz, whatever Harris says, Walz will.
I don't like it that I'm playing these podcasts from Commentary Magazine. They're a bunch of neocons, but I just got to hand it to them. I think their analysis is sharp.
You know, dramatically nod his head and do finger snaps, you know, like it's a Occupy Wall Street rally.
I mean, I listen to maybe 20 videos a day. All right. I'm often looking for excerpts that I want to play on this show. And gosh darn it, this is just about the best stuff that I found.
Or a Tentifada sit-in, you know. So I think she likes that aspect as well, that she'll have kind of, again, and I've compared him to Ed McMahon in the past, she'll have Ed McMahon there to say, yes, 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 Kamala, you're absolutely right.
Can I tell a quick story from 45 years ago? It's a story about Pat Moynihan, who's a close friend of my family's. Pat Moynihan was senator from New York, and Jimmy Carter, in this famous period, actually, again, in August, so it was literally 45 years ago this month, retreated to Camp David for 10 days to consider the condition, the spiritual, moral condition of the American people before he was going to deliver maybe the most notorious presidential address in history that has come to be known as the malaise speech, even though he never used the word malaise. Anyway, Pat came back from Camp David. He was over at our house and he told this story. And the story was that he went to Camp David, as did many senators, and sat with Carter for 45 minutes. And sitting in the room with Carter was Rosalind Carter, his wife. And Pat told Carter what he thought Carter needed to say and needed to do. And Carter sat there quite silently, and Rosalind was holding his hand, and Carter would sort of look away, and then Rosalind would gently say, well, Pat just said you need to address problems in the family. And then Carter would say, yeah, we need to address problems in the family, something like that. And I mean, he never wrote about this or anything, but Pat came back and said, I think Carter had a nervous breakdown, or he's like on the verge of a nervous breakdown, which might kind of have been true. And I mean, not like a nervous where he had to be hospitalized and given ECT and stuff like that, but that he had genuinely fallen into an existential funk and did not know what to do, right?
That's a great story. I mean, John Podhoretz is great on social media. He's great in podcasts. This is a great story, and it's very likely quite applicable to Kamala Harris, who seems to have a problem with alcohol and/or Xanax.
So this pops into my head, not because I think that Harris is going to go off and that Walz is there to steer her back by holding her hand or doing snaps or finger snaps, but the security blanket idea of the candidate for president of the United States needing a sycophant sitting next to her to keep her on track in the interview is a little disturbing.
You might say it's,
put it mildly,
weird.
Seth, again, you as a longtime watcher, I mean, I'm not sure. Obviously, candidates do joint interviews. Like Clinton and Gore did joint interviews the first week that they were together because they were trying to send a very specific message, which is, I'm Bill Clinton. This is Al Gore. We think exactly the same thing. I haven't actually gone and tried to make an ideological alliance across my party, and I'm going to like soft pedal my moderation. I am Mr. Moderate. Here's Mr. Moderate too. He is my clone. We are the same person. You can vote for us. We're in the middle. So
right, and also there's an energy aspect to it, right? Like had he picked Sam Nunn, they probably wouldn't have done the same strategy. Of two youngish, energetic guys trying to show you that they had spirit, like we used to say in NCSY. We've got ruach, yes we do. We've got ruach. How about you? There was like that sort of cheerleader spirit. But I think the difference is
Adam White. Just so you understand, ruach.
Okay, ruach means spirit. All right, let me fast forward.
Together for a ticket, it's kind of like here's why this ticket will mesh. Right, I'm the top of the ticket. Here's why this guy's here to balance it out. Things like that. Right. It's very rare that you have someone running for president who is in the position she's in mostly because she's attached to others. That's the difference. She's not independent, power-based Kamala Harris. She is vice president. Does anybody know where Kamala Harris is or what she's up to? And now she's the top of the ticket and hasn't done any of these.
Right. 5 days. She went 5 days after the end of the Democratic convention without making public appearances, without campaigning. It's so bizarre. And when we look at Kamala Harris, are we looking at someone who significantly slept her way to the top?
These interviews yet. And so it's much stranger to bring along the chaperone when Kamala herself needs to sort of be introduced in a big way. She needs the full interview hour or 45 minutes, whatever it is.
What is Walz that is different from Kamala, right? It's not that he's a governor from Minnesota. It's not that he's a more progressive or he's a progressive governor from Minnesota. It's not any of that. It's that he's a white guy. And I think she wants to sit there with a white guy because the Democratic problem in the election is white guys. But I don't think having a white guy sitting there for an hour is going to incline white guys in America to go, hey, she's sitting next to a white guy. That's great.
We know. I mean,
she's there. I may have some problems with her because she's, half black and half Indian. But, she's got this Minnesota white guy. I'm all in. I mean, but I don't know whether that's how they're thinking.
Maybe, but normally there's a primary process and you have won acclaim from the voters and you have emerged as the voters' champion for your party. And therefore, you would like to introduce this gentleman named Tim Walz, who's going to be with you and give guys a sense. You've seen me out winning all the primaries and I've just participated in 20 debates, but you should get to know Tim. This is not that. So it comes off as more chaperone and less, Clinton glory.
But it's not just chaperone. The idea, I think, from the campaign's point of view is they want to dilute her. A little bit of Kamala goes a very long way, and they need to sort of infuse whatever the proceedings are with other personalities, and he's the closest at hand.
Look, remember, he gave a 17-minute speech. She gave a 32-minute speech. They don't want to talk. That's not also neither of those things was normal either. They don't want to talk. They don't want to talk specifics. That's why they don't want to do interviews. They don't want to talk. So maybe the idea is if you split the time, she can blather about nothing, and then he can blather about nothing. And it's like they're sitting at Tom's Diner in Seinfeld having a conversation about oatmeal.
Show's over.
As long as Dana Bash doesn't make them uncomfortable. And I will say for the record, I assume that whatever understanding there could be in which it's go easy on her has to be so implicit. I mean, it's still the case that this is CNN. Dana Bash is a longtime pro. She's not going to say, don't worry, I'm not going to ask about Gaza. I'm not going to ask about the confusion about your price gouging plan. I'm not going to ask you about whether the Fed should cut rates. I'm going to ask you, about your brisket recipe. So I don't think any such quid pro quo could possibly have been articulated. That would be too discomforting. It would be much more likely, that the selection of Gayle King or Drew Barrymore. She could have gone on the Drew Barrymore show and had Drew Barrymore ask her if she would be Kamala again. Whatever. She decided not to do that, and then thought, I think, or they think, better to have less time by having another interlocutor so that the hour is split up and that, it's not just a relentless focus on her, which again, I think is a sign of weakness. Maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe the public won't respond to it. And we are going to get her. The things that are going to go out to 50 million people are going to be her answers, not Tim Walz's answers. What happens on this, the Friday morning shows and the stuff that is cut for CNN, for like NPR's headlines and news radio's headlines, if there is news radio, that kind of thing. So it's just an interesting thing to watch for. And Dana Bash will be torn in two ways. I think one of which is she wants to show that she's a professional and that she is doing the same job she's always done. And the other is she will not want to get roasted on an open spit for doing things that will be seen as helping Donald Trump by putting Kamala Harris on the spot, because maybe that's fine even in her guild, but because everybody now is responded to on social media, she could be turned into a villain. She could be made into a monster. You could have this entire weird Washington and academic intelligentsia led by people like ordinarily sane or people I used to think were rational or thoughtful people like Michael McFaul, the Russian and Soviet scholar, who was like, she should never answer a question. We all know what she thinks. Don't answer any questions. It's like, really? I thought you were like an academic who believed that people should express their own opinions. This is now a conventional opinion in the American elites. And she, not only among the crazy, hysterical Keith Olbermann voters. And so she's in a tough spot, I think, because if she does her job, she's going to get wailed for it. And if she doesn't do her job.
Okay, I just found a new thinker who I'm quite excited about because she plugs a lot of holes in my intellectual armory. And her name is Regan Arntz-Grey, and she's from Canada, and she recently became an American citizen, and she's in the upper left here.
And I think a couple of things I want to talk about are just like, I think he wrote it in 2008, so it's been
This is a
a
Sam
while,
Harris.
and
Why not faith
I think
discussion.
when it was
Okay,
originally
this
like a
woman
lot
here.
of the tone in it doesn't fully translate, I think, to 2024, just in terms.
Anyway, she wrote a terrific Substack piece on the how she hates women who use the thirst trap to get to the top. All right. So she says, when it comes to capitalizing on your sexuality within the workplace or the intellectual arena, I'm tempted to slut shame. I'm tempted to call these women out, do my small part to bring their reputation down to the level I think is deserved for using these cheap tricks. She claims I don't actually do it, but I really, really want to. And so I just admire her courage. And thirst trapping your way to the top. All right. She says, I've been privy to many situations where someone was choosing to sleep their way to the top, but I do feel the desire to shame women who I see using their sex appeal to help them succeed within the intellectual marketplace. All right. So here she's talking to Alex Kashuta.
If you've never
This
faced
is
consequences for your
Regan
own
here.
actions, if you're never told that, hey, it sucks that that happened to you, but you made a mistake and you shouldn't
Whoa, maybe I should rewind this a little bit. Okay, this is
going to
Regan
somebody's
Arntz-Grey.
apartment, not
All right, she's my new favorite thinker for today.
feeling scared, saying she knew she could have left, and then calling it some kind of assault. And I'm like, that to me is ridiculous. And infantilizing and all of this stuff. Now, more recently, I feel like I don't really hear this stuff anymore. I mean, women on the left have kind of like dropped out of being a class that anybody cares that much about, as like racial stuff has become just much more prominent. So I've been hearing so much more of the Louise Perry, Mary Harrington type of arguments around, listen, women are more agreeable, sexual norms are very liberal, men enjoy those liberal sexual norms, or a very small percentage of men enjoy them at least, and women are conformist and agreeable, and so they're going along and having the sex that they don't want. And
That's not my experience. All right, I have not experienced women having sex with me simply to be agreeable. What's your experience?
we need to protect them or whatever. So the first thing I'd say is telling women, hey, you're probably not going to enjoy casual sex because guess what? A bunch of women have done this before. Most of them find it unrewarding, unfulfilling, and all of that. I think being honest about that message and being honest about the differences in sexuality between men and women is great. But I don't think that pretending that women, like, I think we got here because people are really, really scared of victim blaming or doing anything on the spectrum of victim blaming. I graduated in 2014. The sort of narrative that I had growing up was like, you got to watch out for men drugging your drink. Okay. That was the number one thing. But no one would say you should try not to get blacked out drunk. Okay. Because then that is getting into the victim blaming territory. So there's a lot of focus on everyone else's actions other than your own.
And she wrote a great essay developing this idea, saying that if women want equal rights, then they have to step up and assume equal levels of responsibility. But many women want to have it both ways. All right. They want increased protection simultaneously with equal rights.
And now I think that it's not that I think the directionality of the idea that, oh, you know, if you're more agreeable, you're going to end up in situations sometimes where you regret your decision is wrong. I'm sure that does happen. But I really think about agency and incentives in terms of their incentive structure effects. So like if every time a woman has a regrettable sexual experience and we all tell her it's not her fault, that doesn't have the same feedback mechanism in terms of informing her future behavior, forming how she thinks about these things, going forward. I think that thinking about agency as this like absolute thing doesn't really make sense. I mean, I don't believe in free will.
And so she says, women who use their sexual appeal, all right, to just attract simps, they really grind my gears. Women who explicitly and intentionally seek out simps, right? I hate to admit how much it grinds my gears. Then she tries to make an intellectual argument, but it just really ticks her off.
So, if you dig down deep enough, I think we can all find causal reasons for various actions. And even if you believe there's some amount of
So if a woman wants to use her attractiveness as a lever to gain success, what is it to me? Because she's betraying women as a class. And because it might work, just like sleeping with your boss can work, right? Kamala Harris got her start in politics sleeping with Willie Brown. She was Willie Brown's mistress, and he gave her his political machine, and she gave him her body.
free will. Much of this stuff is related to things that are out of our control. And like your personality characteristic is just not a mitigating factor when it comes to whether you had agency in doing something. It might be something that you might want to be aware of. Like, let's say you realize, hey, I am kind of somebody who freaks out about awkward situations. Well, then you probably shouldn't be having casual sex. Like, then you should just be having sex with people that you feel very comfortable and trusting with, and not being alone with people otherwise. And you'll have to, the way I said it is like, if you're so lacking in assertiveness that an uncomfortable conversation with a man is enough for you to let him have sex with you when you don't want to, then you're either going to have to work on developing that assertiveness, or you're going to have to keep yourself out of those situations. I don't really see a third option. And in terms of adding additional legal protections for these women, I think people make that argument. I think that it's bad for both men and women. And I also think like it just doesn't create the structure which allows people to develop these skills. Like if you never face consequences for your own actions, if you're never told that, hey, it sucks that happened to you, but you made a mistake and you shouldn't have done that. You shouldn't have been in that situation, or you shouldn't have not said no when you didn't want to have sex with this guy, then yeah. So that's basically, there's a couple of things. Like for pragmatic reasons, I think we should give people agency. And also I just think that the costs of freedom are worth the benefits to most women.
Yeah.
Right. So this is Alex Kashuta, who I find absolutely unbearable podcast host because her questions tend to be so long-winded and messy and ill-focused. Just she has great guests, but I just find it absolutely unbearable as a host. Let's see how she does here.
I think I agree with you on that. Though I do think
you don't need to say I agree with you or I don't agree with you. All right, you don't need that in a host.
Mary's work and Louise's work are really good contributions on a cultural level because they kind of open up a new kind of perspective and field of play for a lot of women. Like as a millennial woman, I grew up with Jezebel style, liberal feminist.
Saying that someone has made contributions is one of the lamest forms of speech.
And I kind of reacted against that because for many reasons, including the Aziz Ansari case, just it got a little bit too much. And what they're laying out is that you have an option, maybe not necessarily to opt out. I mean, that's kind of the gray area. Okay, how does one opt out?
It's just all over the place. Just cannot speak coherently in a linear, focused way
of this, and the actual total opting out would be for the government to step in and to change incentives in a market, which the government usually does very clumsily and absolutely terribly in most cases, and clumsily at best. So I don't think the government should be involved in regulating people's dating life in any way, but I do think at the level of culture, laying out
right. And how many people do want the government out there regulating and legislating people's dating lives? Right, nobody.
Potential, even the fact that this conversation, whatever you think about it, brings up sex differences in a realistic way and says, okay, men are this way. Maybe sometimes they're exaggerated in some ways, some of this discourse, the differences between men and women, but people are made aware of them. So I think maybe this is just kind of a stage of culture that we have to go through. First, we had kind of this implicit understanding of sex differences that was encoded in kind of traditional ways of living. Then everything liberalized because, comfort, modernity, technology, all of this. Then we had kind of this egalitarian norm where, everyone had to be a cog in the machine. And now we're kind of waking up to, okay, this also is not serving us very well.
I just find her unbearable.
We have to, be cognizant of what's the reality here. And I think what you bring in is a very data-focused approach to this. Okay, what is true? What parts of this are real? What parts are exaggerated? What parts are useful? And what parts stink? So I think that's really good.
Yeah, I mean, thinking about Louise's work, I mean, first of all, her book is a great read. I enjoyed it. I think it's missing something in its thesis, which is, listen, if you think about the technological changes that we've had, birth control and access to abortion, safe abortion, obviously those lower the risks to women from engaging in sex with people that they don't know as well. You could even throw in there like better STI treatments and all of that. So basically we've had all these reasons which mean that sex has become less costly to engage in for women, both from the physical perspective as well as from the social perspective. And the social part obviously followed the physical safety changes. As thinking from an economic point of view, it's like if you lower the cost of something, obviously you're going to see an increase in the equilibrium level of that thing. So of course we see that more people are having, women are having higher numbers of casual sex partners to some degree. But I don't think that necessarily implies that there's a huge rise in unwanted sex that's happening, because we have these other reasons to expect that would have increased anyway. So that's the first thing. But in terms of opting out, I don't think it's that easy to fully opt out. I think that you can have boundaries and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, I think realistically, if you're living in a sort of urban liberal environment and you're not going to sleep with some guy for months and months and months.
Louise Perry, I think's fine. I get some value from listening to her. No, not my favorite female intellectual, but definitely well above average.
That's going to hurt you on the dating market. So I don't think that it's trivial to opt out, even though I am saying, you got to make your own decisions and all of that kind of stuff. But yeah, on the sex differences piece, I do focus quite a bit on sex differences, more than I sort of want to, because I have a weird tension, which I've heard you kind of talk.
So Regan is center-right. She's not alt-right, and she comes from a very mainstream background. She has an elite education. She worked in the corporate world. in finance.
Talk a little bit about like how blue-pilled and how red-pilled should we be with respect to talking about sex differences, because they, you know, the existence of sex differences gets abused sometimes to form some narratives that I think are exaggerated and unnecessary. But I do kind of feel like I've been forced into a position of talking about sex differences because of the left-wing demand for equal representation and everything, where it's like, well, okay, if you're going to bean count every single place where women are not exactly equally there, then of course we're going to have to talk a lot about why we might expect to see that. The problem with talking about it a lot is that there's a huge intersexual variance, and there's a lot of overlap on a lot of characteristics. And so, like, I recently wrote a tweet about this where it's like, people who are interested in this podcast, in this discussion, or people who like discussing stuff in this way, whether it's right-wing or left-wing or center, those are mostly men who like to do that. And there's reasons that we would see that. But my point is, like, all of us are weirdos. Most people don't like to like sit around and debate with their friends. Most people find that not fun. So so my point is, like, yes, it's weird that it's even more weird when you see a woman doing it. But I've seen sometimes people be like, oh, well, you're kind of a masculine woman because you have this interest. And I'm like, there's definitely some ways in which that's true. But I don't think when we're talking about certain behavioral patterns, like, being male is not the main interesting thing. Like, the people who like to debate and talk about ideas are already weird. Yes, women are even more unlikely to be in that group, but like, we're the variable of interest there that actually divides us is not sex differences, because most men also don't like doing this. So I guess what I'm trying to say is I think it's a very blunt just way of understanding behavioral differences between groups of people. Sometimes it's very relevant. At the tails of a bunch of things, it's extremely relevant, but it also shouldn't get over applied such that we
these roles. Yeah, I mean, in reality, it tends to run the women ragged because there's just so much more physical constant labor attached to the female role. And yeah, it's not surprising that there's quite a bit of a backlash because of that.
Yeah, I think that, you know, hearing you talk about that, it just makes me think of this. I think I think there's issues with the dating market. I mean, a lot of people are not happy with it, and we can talk about that. But I also think I see a lot of people, men and women, who go into the dating market in a very objectifying way of thinking. And I'm like, it's not surprising to me that you're getting bad results if you're focused on how can I squeeze this other person to create the life that I want. And again, both male and female. Like,
okay, so I've just been going through Regan Arntz-Grey's Substack notes in particular, and I just really enjoy her clarity. Here she is, May 10th. The normalization of plastic surgery not only raises the equilibrium amount of time and effort that people feel they should be spending on their looks, but also negative from the perspective of appreciating beauty. Something is lost in a world where every actress is a nose job and lip fillers. So I see so many bad lip fillers. I guess I don't even recognize the good ones. But I can't stand lip fillers that I can recognize. Right. Now it's the case that an actress not having a nose job is the exception. And certainly there are cases where plastic surgery and invasive anti-aging procedures feel empowering. Those are the exception. Taking on the risks as well as the costs that come with these procedures sends a message to yourself that how you look is very, very, very important. And I think most women could use less of that, especially since the advent of the wall discourse, not more. I'm not suggesting women should not take care about how they look. I'm suggesting it should be balanced with other sources of self-identity and worth, right? Whether getting 10% hotter is worth spending excessive amounts of time and money on. Yeah, that's a good point. Is getting 10% hotter for a woman worth spending a lot of time and money on? On the other hand, I think most women who are going gray do look better when they color their hair. And then she tackles that Netflix Dallas Cowboys cheerleaders documentary that I loved. And she says many female podcasters have been expressing outrage over the low pay that the Dallas Cowboy cheerleaders receive. So they can make up to about $70,000 a year with appearances. And the billionaire sports owner says it's fine. They make so little while being held to exacting standards and a grueling schedule because the girls aren't motivated by money, right? It's not a good look. Dancers aren't paid that much in general because a lot of people want to be dancers. Because a lot of people want to be dancers, right? They're thrilled to work their asses off for terrible pay in a career that expires after a few years. The Dallas Cowboy cheerleader girls are no different. They are skilled, but the level of skill needed is low enough that they're pretty much interchangeable. You just need to be pretty enough, good enough at dancing, and able to handle the yes, ma'am culture of the organization and the insane schedule while maintaining another job. That is a lot to ask, but the market appears to have far more supply of potential Dallas Cowboy cheerleaders than it does have demand for them. So that's why they don't get paid much, right? Sure, they may appear underpaid relative to the effort they put in, but the non-monetary perks of having the job clearly more than compensate. Otherwise, Cowboys would not be overwhelmed with applicants every season. Fair pay is less about the absolute value you create than it is the value you create, which other people can't or don't want to create. Finance jobs pay because they require skill, make money, and are boring. Dance jobs require skill and make money, but they are really fun, and so they don't pay very much. Right? A lot of common sense from Regan. And she notes, while women are on average more agreeable than men, that does not exempt us from the consequences of our actions. Just as men being subject to more violent impulses does not exempt men from being held accountable when they act on their impulses, right? So too, women have impulses to be agreeable, right? That should not exempt them from being held accountable. If you're not assertive enough to explicitly say no to someone who wants to have sex with you, or you're not assertive enough to leave if they persist in trying to engage after you said so, then you should probably avoid casual hookups altogether. Then she has some edgy essays on age of consent. First wave feminists push for a higher age of consent, desiring to protect young women from exploitation by men. Second wave feminists argued in doing so that they reinforce stereotypical notions of female passivity and incompetence. And here she's talking about, I become interested in understanding the conditions under which we are okay with taking away some individual rights due to perceived incompetence and conditions under which we're not. So if you're a woman who feels constantly taken advantage of, right, you're probably incompetent. If you're a man who feels like you're constantly being taken advantage of, there's probably something incompetent about you. Right? We're usually okay with limiting the rights of young people. Those limits are temporary, and young people have not fully developed their personality or identity. We're okay with limiting the rights of people with mental illness. And definitely if they're living on the streets and creating a social hazard, we should be willing to force people to get treatment. If we want more of a given behavior, we have to incentivize it. So there's a growing market for public writing and engagement by fallen academics who become frustrated by the preference, falsification, and painfully narrow Overton window they experience in academia. Creating alternative institutions which provide additional career paths is another avenue. There's always been some degree of academic politicking which narrows the range of acceptable opinion. It's likely become worse given the extremely unrepresentative ideological skew in many departments. It's popular these days for a certain type of anonymous account to post memes beginning with the sentence, "Men used to go to war, and now this is what they do in the modern world." This kind of meme almost takes it for granted that there was a time when people were courageous, a time that has irreversibly passed. But were we ever brave? Right? There are two types of courage: high potential upside courage and low potential upside courage. Going to war, taking part in any form of physical confrontation, at least for the nobility, was a high potential upside endeavor. One would be showered in glory if they succeeded. Yes, there was a lot of risk involved, but there was also a great deal of gain. Saying politically incorrect things in the workplace, all right, usually there's not a lot of gain for that. And Richard Hanania says, if you're spending 20 hours a week on some anonymous social media account while being anonymous, that's stolen valor, right? I don't see that, right? Other people have responsibilities and are not as good at raising money as Richard Hanania. So if you have responsibilities that would strongly incentivize you to not say edgy things online under your real name, it perfectly makes sense that you should only do so anonymously.
I worked in finance, and some of the stuff my colleagues would talk about, the way they would talk about dating was like, wow. And then they'd be like, oh, men are assholes. And I'm like, well, you're literally telling all your colleagues about how he doesn't make this much money or whatever. And I'm like, I'm not surprised you're not meeting the most caring guys who are looking at you as a potential partner to balance things with and all of that. So yeah, I think that's part of it. I also did want to say, like, going back to Louise and Mary, because I do disagree with them in very specific ways. What I think one of the really valuable things that I think they've done and that you've also done, and this is for me personally, is talking about motherhood in a realistic way that both recognizes how great it is, like without, you're not selling some kind of fake trad life where everything is perfect and whatever all the time. But I, in my late 20s, was unsure about whether I wanted to have kids, and like hearing those narratives was helpful for me from, other smart, gentic women. But yeah, going to the date.
And she has a Substack essay, "Conservatives Are the Real Victims of Discrimination, the Left-Leaning Environment on College Campuses, and the Broader Social World in Which Academics Exist." is often unattractive to most conservatives, and this, in addition to personality differences and the self-reinforcing evolution of disciplines in which liberals are overrepresented, explains much of the underrepresentation of conservatives in academia, perhaps more than explicit discrimination does. But the extremely low level of conservative representation within the social sciences, the reduction in that representation over time, and the potential certain assumptions and results to go unchallenged in such an environment justifies concern. So that's Regan's essay, Conservatives Are the Real Victims of Discrimination. So once again, my thesis topic that right-wing victimization is real, but if you are mad about it as a substitute for taking responsible adult action in your real life, then that is tiresome. Here is a good Substack essay by her boyfriend. It says, and I encountered this, when you find someone playing obnoxiously loud music in a subway car, right? That's not a randomly selected person from the general population. Blatant disregard for social norms correlates with antisocial behavior more generally, including a propensity for violence and mental illness, and confronting such a person has a more than even chance of non-compliance and threat of escalation. So rational self-interest would suggest that you back off, because the person that you want to confront likely has more experience with violence and a higher likelihood of carrying a deadly weapon relative to the median person. Right? When you factor in the likelihood of the other party being armed, it would seem rational for even the most trained fighter in the world to avoid escalation. Yeah, it's really bad idea to try to confront strangers publicly, particularly in a diverse society. So there's a masterclass of an episode on Louis C.K. He's on a first date. He's enjoying donuts and coffee with an attractive woman. All goes well, and then there are a group of boisterous teens who are getting increasingly loud in the background, making it nearly impossible for the duo to converse. So Louis turns around and he asks them to take it down a notch, irritation apparent in his voice. This is precisely the provocation the delinquents are looking for. One of them comes over to start a conversation that isn't even a thinly veiled attempt at intimidation. He recounts the time he nearly beat someone to death, and he asks Louis to beg him not to hurt him in front of his date. Louis is made to comply multiple times so his date can witness his humiliation once again. Then the teens laugh and walk away. Louis' date then says something that no man wants to hear. I totally get it. You did exactly what you should have. But if I'm being honest, that was a turnoff to watch a guy debase himself just to be safe.
Pretending she agrees with you on everything, but we can't let her pretend, ladies and gentlemen. We have to remind people of the real record.
Trump's the victim of identity theft. He should lock her up when he wins. And Biden's so unpopular, Harris doesn't want anything to do with him. After the coup, they made Biden take a 20-day vacation, so no one remembers Kamala as his VP. It's hard to forget, since Kamala was border czar, bragging about Bidenomics and how she was the last one in the room with Joe before he left Afghanistan. Kamala's been devastated by JD all week. He's running around the Rust Belt, taking her apart, and the media can't defend her because everything Vance says is true. So Politico covered it this way. Vance tries to tether Harris to Biden during Michigan rally. The media is arguing Harris isn't a part of the Biden-Harris administration. Well, why would they do that if Joe belongs on Mount Rushmore, right? Shouldn't Kamala be proud to be his VP? A month ago, Democrats were not proud that Kamala was VP, remember?
5 weeks ago, she was known as a joke. She was known as a terrible vice president. Laughed at, scoffed at. They wanted him out, but they didn't want her. They would have done anything to get anybody on the list. You know, they had a list of 10 people. And they put her on the list, and she came in 11th. She was the last on the list. Then all of a sudden, they realized that's not going to be politically acceptable. They didn't want to do it. They didn't have the guts to make that move. And they ended up with her. And then the fake news media, of course, got right behind her.
Her handlers don't even trust her to survive a softball CNN interview. So Coach Walls is going to chaperone tomorrow night at 9.
I think it's incredibly weak sauce to show up with your running mate. The fact that they don't have enough confidence in her to let her sit herself, the actual top of the ticket, and do a single interview. In fact, I think the hand-wringing and the gyrations over this over the last month show a troubling lack of confidence in her political ability, which also makes you wonder as a voter, well, what kind of president would you be if this kind of a small-time decision, can we do an interview or not, what does that look like for your decision-making process?
A lady who holds a mock dinner party to prepare for a dinner party cannot be commander-in-chief. Insecure and riddled with anxiety is not the way you want to walk into the most stressful job in the world. Being president isn't a dress rehearsal.
I will tell you, I was in band when I was your age. It requires a whole lot of rehearsal, a whole lot of practice, long hours, right? Sometimes you hit the note, sometimes you don't.
Kamala's a nervous wreck who can't be trusted with the nuclear codes. This job's not for her. The only actor that can be president's Reagan. So rip up the script. The real Kamala likes outer space. She likes Venn diagrams, Stevie Wonder, and school buses. She likes to laugh. She's not into policy. She doesn't know anything about it. The first time she took the bar exam, she failed. She thought you put gas in an electric car. She's been riding all around in a bus all day in Georgia with Tiananmen Tim, high-fiving and hugging kids who can't vote. Is the bus electric? No. She's against electric buses now. America First legal founder and former senior advisor to Trump.
Okay, let me read to you just a little bit more here from Regan. And she responds to this comment by Rob Henderson. He claims, as a woman, you don't get feedback as a full human being, whereas a man, you get judged on everything. We're judging you on your looks, right? On your personality, right? But women judge men on your looks, your personality, your income, your job, your sense of humor, your vibe, everything. Men are being evaluated in a more holistic way. And then when we're saying, no, we're evaluating you as a human being, not just your appearance, your body, and everything about you sucks. Okay, and so this is a type of right-wing victimhood that I tire of. And Regan has a great response here. Rob is confused how men evaluate women for sex with how they evaluate women for marriage. Women are also judged as a full human being, and rejection hurts for similar reasons it hurts men. You're being judged as not worthy of marriage. You are judged as not worthy of partnership. So entering 12-step programs for love addiction and sex addiction that were significantly also composed of women, so between 30 to 50% of the women in this particular 12-step program of the people, all right, up to about half of them were women. And so it really helped me to learn about how women struggle in the areas of sex and love and romance. All right, the specific mix and the weighting of traits that the average woman cares about in men will differ from those that the average man cares about in women, but it goes far beyond looks. If women are not willing to sleep with you, and if that's the ultimate judgment men have to face as evolved beings, men not being willing to marry you is the ultimate judgment women face as social beings. Men are much less picky when it comes to short-term sexual partners because the cost-benefit of casual sex is much better for men. When it comes to marriage, where men will invest heavily in one woman, they are just as picky as women, and women typically want the commitment more and earlier than when men get to decide when to propose. Right? It's not uncommon to see examples of hot women who are confused as to why they're single and who see not being able to get a man to commit as a painful judgment on them as a person. Unless you are the most basic woman in the world with nothing to differentiate yourself and all you want is a decent-looking guy who's nice and responsible enough to marry you, your looks are unlikely to be the main thing that gets a man to commit to you. Plus, there's only so much you can do about how you look. Once you are in shape and practicing good hygiene, you're 95% of the way to your peak. And investing time in expensive beauty treatments and clothes might be fun, but it's unlikely to turn many men's heads that you wouldn't have turned without them. You can only get about 10% hotter. If women want to make themselves more attractive for marriage, they should invest in finding ways to showcase the traits that make them extremely high value to some subset of men that they are attracted to. If you have a hobby that is mostly male, lean into that. Men like women who like things that they like. And Rob Henderson and Richard Hanania speak largely to relatively young male audiences. Young men care a lot about their looks, but overweighting this metric when selecting a partner is not in their long-term benefit. It would be more socially beneficial to counsel these men on all of the traits that matter after marriage and kids in which they may not appropriately value, then reinforce that women are mainly valued for their looks. Yeah, excellent points here by Regan. Let me play a little bit more from her.
Dating stuff maybe for a second, and talking about the data side of things. Like one of the things I looked into on my blog was the narrative of, post dating app world, the top whatever percent of guys are getting all of the women. They're having these sexual harems, and then the women are trying to go on to marry guys later.
Right, that's another typical right-wing victimhood that I hear in these circles, distant right circles, how the world's just balanced against them.
But by that point, they're all MGTOWs because they're pissed off about not having had these women earlier in life and all of that stuff. And like the data just that we have doesn't bear that out. I mean, the reality is no matter what you look at, people in the comments will say that it doesn't seem right and that you need to look at the 99.9th percentile guys rather than the 90th percentile guys and whatever. They might be right. You can't get to the 99.9th percentile sexual partner numbers because the sample sizes just aren't big enough for those kind of things to be something you could track over time. But I think that there's some truth to a little bit more of an increase in people not having had many sexual partners over the past year, but you see that on both the male and female side. And then in terms of the number, there's been no shift. So I think that a lot of the times with these kinds of narratives, people really create their own hell. Like if you tell yourself all of this stuff that you might as well not even try and go out, it's more likely to come to fruition. And if you go into the dating market objectifying every single person you meet and not trying to, which by the way, I think it's totally reasonable to have, like, especially if you're trying to have kids with somebody in the next couple of years, to have some requirements around lifestyle things that you are expecting to be on the same page about and that kind of thing. But I don't think that, like, we have this human evolved mechanism already of how to select partners, which is based on how you feel about the person and how attractive they are to you and all these kinds of things. And I guess, like, I think people underweight how valuable that part is. And just that you're going to be better off if you find someone who's like a true partner to you, emotionally, cognitively aligned with you in terms of goals. Yeah, I just think trying to slot someone into the wife or the husband role in that way is a bad way to go about dating. And I say this as somebody who's never been on the app, so I totally recognize that I don't know what it's like, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this kind of reflects back I've been on the apps. I've had my husband on the app, so I'm a veteran. I know how this works. But it's very hard to give dating advice because like as someone, as a woman, I have a certain profile. Whatever is interesting about me to men. It's
number of axes that you want to get a 9 out of 10 on has increased, and I think that's a good thing in some ways. Like I look at a lot of boomer marriages and frankly, they look fucking awful. So yes, they were stable and they had children and that's very valuable, but they also weren't, they're a lot of them are just together because they're together. They're not having a good time. They never dealt with their repeated resentments that have built up over the years. And, who knows, maybe my family and friends in that generation are just particularly bad. So I think there's like, maybe we've overshot that and gone too far to the relationship needs to be incredible in every way or you shouldn't bother with it. But obviously the reality is that yes, people have more other options. Some of those are, like you said, gaming or alcohol and drugs or whatever, porn, but some of them are actually like other ways to make meaning.
So listening to this woman's podcast and watching these few videos you'll find on YouTube, reading her Substack, it's a good way to challenge any entrenched victimhood that you might have, particularly as a man.
And I think that especially for women, I mean, the children part of it is very easy to underweight when you're in your 20s. It's also that perhaps some of the, older women that we're hearing from, while they love their kids, they didn't have what you were describing with your husband. Like they were suffering under a more one-sided thing with respect to the children, and they had to give up more for their children. And now there is.
Okay, some great stuff on Mark Halperin's show last night.
I don't have anything particular other than the video of Tim Waltz. What I thought was interesting is he doesn't own a home. It's another weird thing on a string of weird lies he's told that are they're not big lies, but they're baby lies. There's weird stuff about his dogs, stuff about obviously his military service, something about him being named some man in Nebraska, obviously him doing IUI instead of IVF, but telling everybody he did IVF. I think I know too much about him and I've seen too much about him. He just comes off really phony to me. I know everybody loves him. I think it's because I don't have daddy issues and I'm not looking for a father figure. He doesn't appeal to me at all. If you need a daddy figure, I'm sure he's fantastic, but
Back to your point first, Mark, I think Kamala Harris failed to reach escape velocity at the convention.
Yeah.
I think it was a beautiful convention, as Megan said. I think she did a great job at bringing together the Democratic base and getting to the 50-yard line, not across it. But to me, if she loses this race, it'll be not because of what she did at the convention, what she didn't do. And that was she didn't explain the transformation into this new figure. When someone shows up and has just completely reinvented themselves, you kind of need to know why. Hey, maybe the country's changed and we've got to change with it. Or, hey, I've been here 3 years and I've learned a lot. Give me some, otherwise your transformation is inauthentic. It's not believable. And what happens? Well, you become a politician who says anything to win. I think that's what happened to her. And so I think we've seen peak Kamala. On the Kennedy thing, I don't think you ought to look at the votes. Don't look at the polls right now. They don't mean anything. What means something is the story. Narrative drives campaigns and that drives votes. And the narrative here is, well, let's add some votes. Generally, that's a good thing in campaigns. Something new is coming to the Trump campaign. When's the last time that happened, right? We all say, Jesus, another Trump rally. And Kennedy is an outsider. Trump is an outsider. Outsiders versus what? Well, Kamala Harris makes her more of an insider and establishment figure. But more than that, Kennedy mystique, the Kennedy dream, that brand is seared into all our brains forever. It represents Camelot interrupted, the promise of something that an America that could have been. And he, yes, he's the black sheep of the family, but sometimes families get old and need to be renewed. He's putting something new on the table. When's the last time you heard a Republican talk about health care for children and clean water? So I think the narrative helps Trump move a little bit across the 50-yard line. And it's not that he'll get 0.5% from Kennedy, though Jill's right, that would be significant. It's that he gives the story a few steps forward in a close race.
Yeah.
On the authenticity scale, if you say Harris is not authentic, where would you rate RFK Jr. and Tulsi Gabbard on the authenticity scale? You could see what.
Can I just say something? Tulsi and I are extremely close friends. She's the godmother to my oldest daughter.
Wow.
And being out in public with her, we went just out to a spa weekend a few months ago, and you cannot go anywhere with her without people getting vociferously emotional around her.
Absolutely.
And I think people underestimate, because she has been demonized so much by so many people Hillary Clinton called her like a Russian asset. Barry Weiss called her a toady on Joe Rogan. Like, people underestimate her following, and she has that like she's been on Joe Rogan like 16 times. She has this very intense following that I've never seen before, even with my dad. Like, people just get very they shake around her. And I know people may not like her, but whatever base she has, they will follow her to the promised land. Like, wherever she says for them to go, they will follow her. And I think she, for me, just my perspective, is much more powerful than RFK is. I think.
Oh, absolutely.
Thank you. So I just want to say that I understand what you're saying, because a lot of women really respond to her. And I know that people don't get it if you don't like her, but I am firsthand person to tell you it is very real.
Megan, what strikes me about your friend, who I don't know obviously as well as you do, is it's rare to be that charismatic and have that big a heart.
She has that gray streak in her hair from trauma and war. It happened almost immediately because she had she's a medic in Iraq, and we're very different on politics. We disagree on a lot of things, but she takes everything very deeply and very seriously. She has been very open about having very serious fertility problems and doing 8 rounds of IVF and it not working. She took what JD Vance said very seriously. She understands how important women are to the Republican coalition. I think if the media gave her even a little bit of a chance, I mean, I fell in love with her a long time ago. And I think people demonize her at their own peril. I think she could be president one day. I know that probably sounds insane to Eleanor and Jill, but I have seen it. I think it's her military experience. And like I said, I think RFK, I think I'm not an RFK person.
On the campaign trail will be very effective in suburban Philadelphia, Chester County, Delaware County, Montgomery County, Bucks County, which will be a critical battleground for Pennsylvania. Gabbard and Kennedy would draw a crowd. If you place them together or separately in Doylestown, Westchester, all of those areas outside of Philadelphia, they will draw a crowd. They'll make the news. They'll stop the news. They will be the focus of the noon broadcast, the 3 o'clock broadcast, The 6 o'clock broadcast, that will be.
Greg, I totally agree with you. And while the Democrats have surrogates like that, like Barack Obama, they're not going to do what I think Kennedy and Gabbard will do, which is go out and do those segments. Sorry, go ahead.
No, they'll just take over.
What you're saying.
They'll take over the news, and you can do that in suburban Detroit. You can do that in Grand Rapids. You can do that in suburban Milwaukee. You can do that in Arizona. You can do that in suburban Atlanta. So I think they'll be very effective, and in many respects better than Trump himself in articulating the message. So I think that would be critical. Just recently, Trump has been, the Harris campaign has run this Trump as a chicken regarding debating, and this has been kind of a joke. Trump should just take her on and say, we'll have 8 debates between.
That's huge, like clearly. My question is, how do you guys feel? Like, how do the speakers feel about this Mark Zuckerberg coming out and saying that? Because that's important to me, and I feel like to a lot of my peers. Like, how do you truly feel? Not what's reported. Like, how do you feel about that? Because, like, is that not election interference? And how do you feel like the platform is going to move forward in this 2024 election?
Now, he said several things. He acknowledged that they shouldn't have suppressed the Hunter Biden laptop story. He acknowledged that they were they succumbed to government pressure to keep some stuff off the platform related to COVID. And he acknowledged one other thing that I'm currently forgetting. Anybody remember what the third one was? With you, I could list about 20 things, but I'll list just a handful. First of all, the press acted wholly uncurious about the laptop and accepted that an orchestrated event by the Biden campaign. They accepted Joe Biden lying on stage about it. He knew it wasn't Russian disinformation, and yet he lied about it. There was no accountability for that. And even if you think the press made a careless or harmless error in judging whether it should have been covered or not, there's been no serious soul searching about what actually happened, both with the social media platforms and the press itself. And finally, there may not be evidence on the laptop that Joe Biden took a sack of money from the Chinese, but there's plenty of evidence on there that he was involved in helping his son and his brother make money off of foreign interests. And that was again, the press was so incurious about it as compared to how they would have been had it been involved the son of a Republican president.
I thought the House Republicans had spent the last 8 months doing the serious soul searching. So I mean.
Well, they didn't find that he took a sack. They didn't find he took a sack of money.
A lot of stuff.
Well, they did. They just were horrible at PR. They're not John Dingell or Henry Waxman. They don't know how to run a hearing. But
yeah, but they're not with us anymore.
Yeah, I know. All right, Anthony, I want to ask you a couple questions because we're going to end on time tonight. First of all, besides support from the media, what's the best thing Kamala Harris has going for her? Well, I'm actually more bullish on the Kennedy endorsement than I was, which we can talk about.
Someone said, Megan, what are you smoking? Mel.
Okay, let me pull one more clip that I want to find here from Mark Halperin.
Is sort of a middle path where what I think most women want is to have like their own interests, maybe some career stuff, maybe it's a big career, maybe it's not, who knows, 5 to 10 years of baby focused time. And then, after that, they probably want to do something else again. So it's like, I don't think of it as this like stay at home mom versus working person, but I do think we're not talking about fertility at a young enough age with women. I think that's a real problem. I froze my eggs when I was 30. I'm 31 and I'm engaged. But I froze my eggs at 30 and everyone was like, why are you doing this now? It's so early. You have so much time. Why would you do this now? And I'm like, are you insane? Have you looked at the numbers? It is not early. It's literally the perfect time to do it. And if anything, I should have done it when I was 28. So I think that's part of the problem. But yeah, the third space is, I don't know how to solve that. I mean, the problem with online spaces is that they tend to gender segregate extremely heavily. In the spaces that you and I are in, probably most.
Okay, here's more. Oh man,
I agree with Eleanor. I thought it was going to be a net negative for Trump. Go back to the Jack Smith indictment. Go back to Mark Zuckerberg just conceding what he did with Facebook and the election. Okay, I think if you consume establishment media, you have no idea, and you live in a blue bubble. You have no idea the power of the forever wars, the deep state, big tech, corrupt media, corrupt prosecutions of Donald Trump. These are emotional and powerful issues. And as Alex said, some people are sick of Trump talking about them. Now he's got 2 people who are super charismatic and have followings. They may not be enough followings to get elected president. They both run for president and lost. But I believe that Tulsi Gabbard and Bobby Kennedy are charismatic people with emotional and sizable followings and great television communicators. Her more than him because he's so undisciplined. But if they go into the battleground states and do events and do media, and not establishment media, although they'll do some of that, I bet. But they're doing podcasts, they're doing social, TikTok. I really do believe that they can galvanize those issues that are unique to Trump and that make him the outsider again, that make him not the incumbent, and that recapture that sense of a movement that Trump himself struggles now, I think, to evoke as much as he did in 16 and even 20 in some ways, because this is the third time. So I may be wrong. I may switch back to Eleanor's position by the middle of the week. But right now, I've watched them both, and I thought Tulsi Gabbard was really good yesterday. She's going to be out on the trail again with Trump Thursday, I think, in Wisconsin. And I just recommend people watch those too.
Okay, let me play a little bit more here.
Most of the time, if you're a woman in that space, you can probably find someone very easily, but they're highly male dominated. And I think the same is true on the feminine side on those bases.
So the point was, Mark Halperin thought that the Robert Kennedy endorsement of Donald Trump was a net negative. On Friday, that was his position. Then last night, which was Tuesday night, right, he came around to the understanding that the Robert Kennedy and Tulsi Gabbard endorsements for Trump are powerful advantages for Donald Trump.
Whereas sort of these real world third spaces were more balanced than what the opportunities are now. I do think, especially for women, like you were saying, men are tending to be the pursuer, and that is a tougher job. And if you're a woman who's looking for someone, there's a lot of low hanging fruit. Like you can start a club or a meetup or whatever. That's how I met my fiance. And you can create the third spaces for yourself. I don't think that works the same from the other side, but I think like for women, if you're finding that the guys you're meeting on apps are losers, like you have a lot of control and power to create your own spaces and meet the type of guys that you are interested in, I think.
Yeah, and you just have to have one special interest, just one special interest, whatever it is. Just build the thing around that, and then coalesce, or just go for the top individuals. I'm on the fence about that, but I wonder what you think about it.
Yeah, so I basically was trying to map why people are disagreeing on certain things so vehemently.
Kip, back onto the show. Kip, what's going on, man?
Hey, man, not much. Another great show as always. Listening to you tonight got me thinking about Buckminster Fuller's contention that Luke's Weltanschauung was comprised of a series of non-simultaneously apprehended events. So with this in mind, I was just thinking about who you trusted, to try to keep yourself tilted always in the right direction. And on one hand, I think maybe you're telling us who you trust by showing us Mark Halperin and these people that you line up for us in this aggregate. But I was just wondering, who outside of these people, do you trust? Because, everybody seems to be shilling something. So I'm just wondering at the end of the day, who do you trust to make sure that these non-simultaneously apprehended a series of events, you're always picking up and not veering off in the wrong direction. You catch my drift, don't you, Luke?
Absolutely. So I think I trust Steve Saylor more than any other public intellectual of which I'm aware, and I have a great deal of respect for Charles Murray. And there's a philosopher of the social sciences, Stephen Turner, who I particularly like. And on the left, I enjoy Decoding the Gurus. So I think that they're very weak with regard to human biodiversity. And so I expect them to constrain their public utterances to those topics that are not going to get them in trouble professionally. But the thinkers that have the most influence on me are the ones that I play on my show and praise, not the ones that I play on my show and decimate, all right, like a Mike Benz, but they're the ones that I play on my show and praise. So I just encountered this Regan woman this afternoon, and I was like, wow, this is the perspective that I needed to hear, like to get a thoughtful, rational female perspective on many issues. I really appreciate her clarity. So she's brand new to my pantheon.
Right. I understand. Certain things, as you can tell, some things get my goat. And one thing that gets my goat is when I fall for a Dave Rubin clip. I think he is the most uninteresting homosexual that I've ever come across. But he must have some young zit-faced kid putting together the best freaking clips on the internet. Because Luke, I have to admit, I fall for him 3 or 4 times a week. And it's not him. It's situations of a conversation I want to hear about. And he's just butting in to say, hey, I'm off this month, but here's a clip from such and such. So on one hand, I'm glad he's not butting his nose in, but on the other hand, have you noticed there's a true art to that, and some people have it, and somehow Dave Rubin either gets along on his looks or homosexuality or something, and it just drives me bananas. Can you understand where I'm coming from?
Oh yeah, I am not a fan of Dave Rubin, but he's apparently very successful with the 100 IQ audience, and the 100 IQ audience is much larger than the 120 IQ audience. To consistently enjoy this show, you have to have a minimum IQ of 120. And the size of that audience is about 3% the size of the potential audience for Dave Rubin, where someone with a 95 or 98 IQ can take it in and benefit from it.
Right. You know, I can't really sit for Ben Shapiro or Dennis Prager or Michael Malice but who I do like is that Megyn Kelly, especially if I'm curious about something with regard to the law. She's a sharp lady. You realize this, right?
Yes. I've really come to enjoy her over the past few. I didn't take her seriously until the shows she started making after the Biden debate, June 27th. I did give her a chance. And since I've been checking out her shows following the June 27 Biden debate, I've got a lot of respect for her work.
I'm sure she, like you, like me, we all have our corners of delusion, but I'm just saying, especially if it's something to do, like if some news comes out about, say, Trump and the legal community or whatever, she's going to be the one I turn to. And if it's not her, it'll probably be a blending of her opinion and a fellow named Glenn Greenwald. Do you know this Jewish fellow I'm speaking of now?
Yes. I enjoy Glenn Greenwald as well.
There used to be another fellow by the name of Matt Taibbi who I liked as well, but
yes.
But I tell you what, he's all sizzle and no steak. You know what I mean? He's got clever words for his stories, but he doesn't know how things tick in the way that Greenwald does, and the way that Megyn Kelly does, and the way that, let's say, Amy Wax does. You know, that's
you get what
I'm saying?
Yeah. I'm a fan of Amy Wax, yes.
So that's just and I wanted to get your opinion. I meant to ask you about this the other day when we were talking about a related subject, but that Count Dankula, he ran into the problems there in the UK. And it's a weird thing. It's a weird quandary to ask you this question, because let me get the story right. His girlfriend's dog, a little pug, he taught it to Sig Heil.
Yeah.
And I think he put it on the internet or something.
Yeah.
And he got fined and like $800 or whatever. And then in the end result, he was like, screw this. He would rather go to jail and protest. And they one-upped him by taking it out of his damn bank account. You know what I mean? Such is the 21st century, where you think you can even show your ass. And they're like, we'll show you. You can't show your ass. So, what's your thoughts on that? You think that's overreach, or have we just reached this in the 21st century?
Yeah, I think that's overreach. I appreciate Count Dankula. He's a comic, and he was doing a comic bit, and that this would be illegal, I think, is completely absurd.
So you do, you think I'm a prophet of doom sometimes, but you do see how maybe not here. Well, here, yes, as well. But in Europe, boy, the creep on their civil liberties, just even down to the speech and stuff, it's kind of scary. You agree with me there? You think it's something we should be concerned with?
I don't know if it's scary. They just have a different social system, and there are benefits to that system. It's not like it only comes with downsides. The benefit is that it forces people on the right to be much more careful with their argumentation. So you don't get the gross low IQ right-wing rhetoric that you find in America. So I prefer the American freedom of speech, but there are benefits to Europe's speech restrictions. I don't agree with them. I wish Europe didn't have them, but I also recognize there are benefits to them. I don't find it scary, and it's not that I sometimes disagree. It's not that I sometimes find you filled with doom. I always find you filled with doom.
Thank God. Thank God. One thing, you being Jewish now, I was going to ask you, well, actually, what got me thinking about it in the shower was the power of commercials, which I don't know. Maybe you do see the power and just slow roll it. But I was thinking about a Reese's commercial campaign that they used to have all through the 1970s, where one jackass would be outside dressed in his construction worker get up, and then maybe a lawyer would walk outside and the lawyer would trip and his chocolate bar would go into the peanut butter of the construction worker, and he's like, you got your chocolate in my peanut butter, you got your peanut butter in my chocolate. And then the tagline would be, two great things that taste great together. Do you remember this commercial campaign all through the 70s?
Vaguely, or I'm familiar with commercials, and I've spent thousands, probably tens of thousands of dollars on products that I've seen advertised, and then they made me think, oh, I really like that. But I've never encountered a commercial that changed my mind and changed me where I was once very much one way, and then suddenly I went the other way. It's just that commercials bring to my attention, or they remind me of things that I want.
Right. And strangely, this is how, you can, if you ever want to get a feel for just how crazy old Kip is, as I was playing that jingle in my head from the 70s, here it is popping up in my head in the shower in 2024. What did my crazy mind go to? That coin from 1934 that Goebbels put together when he and when the Nazis and the Zionists were all warm and fuzzy and they were buddies back then. And I could just, that image of that Reese's commercial was juxtaposed with that on one side of that coin and that swastika on the other side of the coin. Now you tell me, Luke, what kind of sick bastard am I?
Well, I'll tell you what kind of sick bastard you are. You're like me. Many years ago, I was in therapy, and I didn't primarily talk about my politics, but I shared a little bit about my right-wing politics in therapy. So this is about 10 years ago, and my left-wing therapist said to me, do you think that you're so radical in your politics because you're so passive in your life? And I immediately recognized the truth of that. Because if you have an active life, which for a normal man means primarily being focused on your career and your family, and also to a lesser degree your friends and community, there's just, that's where your focus goes. And even if you're upset with speech restrictions on the other side of the world, you just don't have that much energy for it.
So she was calling you, Luke, was she calling you an NPC? I know we're stepping, that's a current term, and you're talking about something from your previous life, but was she calling you an NPC?
It was a he. I think he might have been gay.
No. What when she was calling you passive, was she calling you an NPC?
It was a he. It's not a she. My therapist was a man.
Okay.
And no, she was not calling me a non-player character. She was simply noting something, that I was incredibly passive with my life. For example, my therapist would try to encourage me to look for a new job that paid more money, and I didn't want to do it. Right? I wasn't taking concrete steps to improve my life. I was just obsessed with right-wing politics and human biodiversity and the growing alt-right. And I combined this obsession with dissident right-wing politics with almost complete passivity with regard to my own welfare.
Right. Yeah, that's I was going to ask you if you had seen a Vice documentary from many years ago called Asses of the Caribbean. Had you seen that?
No, I don't like Vice. Overwhelmingly, I just do not like Vice.
Well, do you know that 15 years ago it was actually edgy? I mean, I know now it's just garbage, but 15 years ago it was edgy, and they had this this one documentary called Asses of the Caribbean. I'm talking to you with broke glasses right now. But on this Asses of the Caribbean, it was very cool because it was like, I can't remember if it was Colombia or Venezuela, but what you had Caribbean machismo culture that had been infused with Catholicism, when the conquistadors came. And they were deeply Jesus lovers, but they were also into this machismo stuff, which meant that they were not going to be allowed to have premarital sex, right? Because Jesus would frown upon this. So how did they square this? Because any machismo man of honor is going to be able to take care of his lady, when they consummate that marriage. So the way they squared it was donkeys. All the boys had girlfriends, donkeys. They had donkey girlfriends that they quote unquote practiced on, Luke.
Oh, God.
Yes, that's the way they squared it. And they would stick the cameras in the mama's faces and stick the cameras in the girlfriend's faces. And everybody was cool with it because at the end of the day, they didn't want to run afoul of Jesus. So isn't that just isn't that weird how?
Well, I know women who gave up their ass and kept their front door for marriage. But during their teens, they gave up their ass to their boyfriends.
I think I heard you say that one time. That is out there as well, but it's not as out there as what I just mentioned. In fact, when they basically said to the boys, "Can I get a show of hands of who has a donkey girlfriend?" And there was maybe 30 boys in the area, and like 21 or 22 of them raised their hands. And some of the ones with the raised hands was looking at some of the boys who wasn't raising their hands going, "Oh, Miguel, we know you got a donkey girlfriend." And by the end of it, I think all of them, but one or two of those little some bitches had raised their hands. So that was that was interesting. I just kind of I was going to leave you with something. The Austrian painter that I tell you gets such a bad rap. One thing, they never give him credit for killing Hitler. You notice that?
Yeah. So I remember in 1998, someone tried to recruit me to write for Vice magazine, and I found it too distasteful. But
it was alternative, but just like anything, it was edgy at the time. And one documentary that it's got to be 20 years old that was real good about explaining that. The documentary was called The Merchants of Cool, and it just basically talked about wherever cool is, somebody's out there to snatch it, commodify it, and a season or two later it's lost its coolness, and so there's just this endless search for cool. But anyway, I'll leave you with that.
Okay, thanks, Kip. Take care. So I remember once I made Rolling Stone's list of top 40 internet personalities under 40 or something like that. That came out circa 1999.
A lot of times there's not a clear fact-based difference. It really is just a difference in value and thinking of it in like, where on the spectrum are you putting the value? So I think social conservatives tend to be worried about the median family person. So with respect to like gender stuff, they are like, male, female, man, woman, that's enough. We're good. We don't need to add anything beyond that because that already serves 97% of people or whatever it is. And I think there's some truth to that. I think that we can actually accommodate more variety there. But yes, we shouldn't pretend that everyone is not the norm so that we make the people who are not the norm.
Okay, seeing conversation in the chat about Yuval Noah Harari. He's an Israeli historian. I just find him so mediocre. Right, just an absolute waste of time whenever I've spent any time with him, either in video or written form.
Slightly more comfortable in these situations. And so basically I find like that's kind of the social conservative. Then I think of the lefty as being, especially the woke lefty, as being focused on the like downside outliers or just regular people who just don't fit into the spectrum in some way. They're extremely concerned about how is society being fair or unfair to those people. And I think that they can make the claim like, listen, we were reacting to social setting where anyone outside of the norm was extremely punished socially, economically, or whatever.
Okay, this is almost live. Mark Halperin on like 6-minute tape delay.
Some people are fascinated by these discussions. Other people just want to hear from who I think is going to win the election. So I'll just say briefly that part of this platform is for learning about what others are thinking who you don't agree with. And sometimes I let people go on a little bit, emotions, the thoughts, the long past time, the accepted tens of millions of Americans. We're trying to understand not just what's going to happen in the election, but why, and also hopefully contribute to a conversation.
So Mark Halperin's deeply worried about a massive mental health breakdown that's going to happen on the left if Donald Trump wins this election.
The longtime members of this community, the Democratic consultant, when they disagree, and we're going to run through a bunch of stuff with them. Then, as always, we're going to want to hear from you all. Please raise regulars. We'd also love some new folks to be part of the conversation. Ask whatever you want. The more your hand. Not a huge, giant news day out there, but some things I want to highlight. The vice president and her running mate are on their Georgia bus trip. I've read a lot about what they did. I've read all the poll reports. Not a lot of like super big news has been made. A typical bus trip, lots of different stops, a variety of restaurants and schools and other places. And somebody on here, if you've seen something I haven't seen, please raise your hand and bring it into the conversation. But I don't see a ton of news there. President Trump didn't do anything today. This morning on the morning meeting, we talked about a Truth Social repost that he made of a sexually suggestive, probably too weak in description, photo of Kamala Harris and Hillary Clinton. And I received many emails today about it and texts asking for a full discussion of it. And we're going to discuss it at least somewhat. Always a challenge for people who are journalists or who manage public forums like this of how much to highlight Donald Trump's more outrageous statements because you give them attention and you're often doing exactly what he would like. In this case, I'm not sure exactly how we're going to discuss it, but we will discuss it some. Vice President does her interview tomorrow, and we're going to look at the Fox polls now that are really teeing up the conversation in terms of trying to get a sense of where the race is. The Trump campaign and some people on Red X have attacked the polls that say they're inaccurate and have raised Fox's past record in some of these battleground states. So I want to look at first the horse race, if we could put that up, please. So you can see they polled the 4 Sunbelt states. And again, leaving the Trump campaign's denigration of these polls aside, you can look at these as good news for Vice President Harris or bad news. Go ahead and put the poll up, please, if we can. On the one hand, Vice President Harris is doing better in the Sunbelt states than Joe Biden was when he got out of the race. On the other hand, she is not as far ahead in these polls.
Okay, so here is the Truth Social post. Trump implied Kamala Harris exchanged oral sex for career boost. This is the second time Trump has posted attacks implying Harris traded sexual favors for advancement. Right, he reposted a vile attack on Vice President Kamala Harris. Here we go, picture of her with Hillary Clinton. Funny how blowjobs impacted both their careers differently. Okay, I don't find that so shocking.
As Hillary Clinton or Joe Biden was in 2020. No, are we able to put, there we go. Okay. So up 1 in Arizona, up 2 in Georgia, up 2 in the Silver State, which I never pronounced because I never pronounced it correctly, and Trump ahead by 1 in North Carolina. You can look at these as Harris ahead, or you can look at them as I do, as they're all well within the margin of error. But there's as I said, half empty, half full ways of looking at them, depending on if you're a Harris supporter or Trump supporter. On the one hand, although she's closer than Biden was and doing better in these states than Joe Biden was, she doesn't have big leads there. And the assumption on the part of the Trump campaign, as I talked about last night, is eventually he'll go back ahead in these states once she starts to get the scrutiny and once she gets defined. I think it's important to think about the traits question. And so let's put up the next slide from this poll. I've said from the beginning that this battle to define Vice President Harris is significant, because I think that this will tell you where the horse race is going to end up if you know how this is going to play in terms of how she's defined, right? So the ability to unite the country, Harris ahead, although not by much, given their reputations. Fighting for people like you, Harris narrowly ahead. This is the one that I think is, and I think Alex is going to come in and agree on this when we bring in Alex and Hank, bringing needed change, tied. Obviously, a big part of trying to define Kamala Harris is as the incumbent. If she's defined as the incumbent, if she's defined as tethered to the the Biden-Harris agenda, her chances of winning will be lower. She has narrowed the gap in polling regarding who's best able to handle the economy and immigration compared to where she was, where Joe Biden was. again, the Trump campaign assumption is they will turn that around with advertising. They will turn that around with the debate. They will turn that around with more media scrutiny of Kamala Harris. We shall see about that. Now, I want to show you a video clip from CNN, which is a CNN anchor interviewing a senior official from the Harris campaign. And I think it's significant because it gives you just a taste, depending on how Dana Bash conducts the interview tomorrow, it gives you a taste of what it's of the difficulty of doing what Kamala Harris has avoided doing up until now, which is repudiating past liberal positions that she took in 2019 as a presidential candidate that she doesn't want to own now. And she's repudiated them through anonymous aides, kind of piecemeal, telling different news organizations, yeah, she doesn't believe in the Green New Deal anymore. Yeah, she doesn't want to abolish ICE anymore. Yeah, she's no longer opposed to fracking. So watch how this professional spokesperson handles the question of, is she against fracking now or is she for fracking?
Come on, guys. I'm trying to run a professional show here. Man, oh man. You can't even hear that.
Made here that goes for energy production and it goes for the economy across the board, right?
But on fracking, was there something that changed her mind specifically during the 4 years of the Biden presidency?
No, listen, again, the vice president is very proud of the Biden-Harris administration's record on energy production and the economy writ large. She wants to continue to build upon the progress that we've made here. That goes for energy production and it goes for the economy across the board, right?
But on fracking.
Okay. So Michael Tyler, very smart guy, professional communicator, and
maybe not such a smart guy.
He couldn't really answer the question, right? And this is a category of question that I'd be surprised if it doesn't come up a fair amount tomorrow in the interview with CNN, which is they're basically two related questions. One is why did you change your position? What did you see? What did you learn that made you change your position? And the other is how do you differ from President Biden or the Biden-Harris record? Those two related questions I think will come up tomorrow. And as I said, the Trump campaign is counting on her having no more success in answering these questions than you saw her spokesperson there just on the question of fracking. I assume he was ready for the question. It's pretty obvious when it's one right up there. And of course, because fracking is so central in Pennsylvania, and because Republicans plan to, no matter what she says about fracking, try to hang around her neck the past public statements in support of banning fracking, fracking may be the most important one in terms of the Electoral College. So it's going to be interesting to see again how she handles that. As I said, I look at that little soundbite clip from CNN, and it puts into me sharp relief about how difficult it is to explain it. One of the things that has not happened, and there's been almost no journalism about this, and I've been asking about it from the beginning, is her repudiation of her past positions has not called the grassroots left, progressive left, or Bernie Sanders or AOC or others to even express disappointment in her beyond the most mildest of disappointment. Bernie Sanders, believes the Green New Deal is where the things should be at, where the party should be at, and she's just repudiated that. So people think that the only issue, they often cast as the only issue related to her explaining her issue positions.
Okay, comment in the chat. Look, if you consider that political figures might be distractions while policies are primarily designed to maintain the status quo, generate profits for those involved, and manage the wealth gap. Well, talking to a guy is far more a structuralist than a personality-centered bloke. So I've talked about personality more since the disastrous Joe Biden debate, June 27th. But prior to that, I rarely talked about Joe Biden. Right? I don't think personalities are that important. All right, structure is far more important because structure, combining economic and military might, right, that dictates how much you can shape the world around you. So policies are primarily designed to meet the interests of key constituents. All right, so we have America dramatically supporting Israel because we have an incredibly influential Israel lobby, not because there's this widespread clamoring for America to subsidize Israel's defense. Right? Americans, like other people around the world, don't care that much about foreign policy. So foreign policy, it has very little control on it from democratic politics. All right, foreign policy, as in many other policy positions, is decided by an elite, right? Democracy only has a mild effect. You get to choose your representatives every 2 to 4 years, but almost all important decisions are made by an elite, and the decisions that a politician will take are those essentially chosen for him by an elite. And the only way that you can have a change for that is if you have the rise of populism. And let's welcome back to the show, Elliott Blatt. Mr. Blatt, how's it going, mate?
Blessing, bro, can you hear me?
I can,
Hello.
loud and clear, bro.
All right. Not a quick call tonight. Sorry. Hey, I don't know if I let you know. I let you know. I don't know if you noticed, but you were mentioned last night on the Chuck Johnson Richard Spencer space.
Oh, what was the mention? I didn't listen.
Okay. So apparently somebody had picked up on your comment about Mike Benz, and so Chuck Johnson, the man himself, the man at the center of the universe, the man around who all important events orbit, said, "Did you hear Luke Ford's commentary? Did you read Luke Ford's blog about Mike Benz?"
You're
So he's
kidding.
a real bug.
Wow.
No, I'm not kidding. I sent you the link.
Oh, wow.
10:28 p.m. Maybe it's still available. Maybe it's not. But there was maybe 2 minutes spent discussing it. But I got a kick out of that.
Did Johnson agree with my perspective?
Yeah, he doesn't like Benz for whatever reason. He doesn't like a lot of people for very murky reasons. Usually that they're spies, of course. So, as you can tell, I've lost all respect for that podcast for Chuck Johnson. But I'm still compelled to listen nonetheless. And that's my own neurosis.
Interesting. I mean, I have respect for Chuck Johnson in that he knows a wide variety of people. He has often been way ahead of the story. All right, he's broken a lot of stories. He's often been way ahead of the curve. It's just that I think much of what he says just doesn't ring true to me. But I respect some of his work a great deal.
Well, everything about his work, I mean, he makes a lot of predictions, right? And some of them do come true.
Yeah.
The ones that don't come true, he just quietly forgets. So to really evaluate him, you'd have to sort of analyze each prediction and say, is he better than 50%? And my gut, and I haven't done this, but my gut instinct that he had, is 50% at best, which is a coin flip. None of his assertions or predictions come with any sort of underlying rationale. That's why I don't give them much consideration. But he makes them with such authority and charisma that you're sort of dragged into it because he paints a world that's really seductive and you sort of want to live in. That there's this great conspiracy going on and you're the sort of underground working against it. So I can see why people are seduced into his little worldview there.
Yeah, and also usually I don't think that's the right criteria, because sometimes if someone's right 1% of the time, it's worth paying attention because the significance of what they're right on can occasionally outweigh even the 99% that they're not right on. So, for example, American foreign policy after 9/11 was built on the basis of if there's even 1% chance or 0.1% chance of some catastrophic event happening, we have to do everything that we can to prevent it. So Chuck Johnson, he does hit some big stories, and so I don't think you can evaluate him on a 50-50 basis. You have to give him credit. Like he introduced Representative Matt Gaetz to his wife. Chuck Johnson's incredibly connected. He's incredibly smart.
Fair enough.
So
let's take a more...
yeah. So occasionally he hits it out of the park. Overall, yeah, I'm quite skeptical of most things that he alleges.
All right. Well, just one, headline prediction he made is that Joe Biden would remain the nominee.
Right.
He said this in the most unmitigated, untempered, unqualified manner. He made this prediction. Of course, that's not what came to pass. And so, how after that, something so consequential and you're wrong about that, like who's not justified in looking askance at whatever else you say? Be one thing to say that there's a chance he remains, but he was like, this is going to happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
The more audacious your prediction is, the more retarded it looks when it doesn't come true.
Yeah, that's true. And I mean, he was in good company. Almost all elites. All right. I was at war with almost all elites on this question because I used my situation perspective. And I said, if this situation's untenable, even though there's absolutely no precedent for what's going to happen, in my view, the situation will outweigh all precedent. And so that's why very quickly I said Joe Biden's going to go. And I was promoting it, pushing it for weeks before he actually went. But almost all of the experts initially said the same thing as Chuck Johnson.
Oh, okay, fair enough. All right. I didn't mean to like take this all in the Chuck Johnson direction. I just thought it was amusing that had
Yeah, it
happened
is.
last night.
Yeah, it's fun.
Because I didn't even realize they read you, but apparently they do read you, and, which I don't know. You may take some.
And I met Chuck Johnson. We had a good conversation. We talked about Kevin McDonald and the JQ and the alt-right. This was something like 2015. So I really enjoyed my walk and talk with Chuck Johnson.
Well, and Chuck recently published a picture of himself having lunch with Nick Fuentes like a week or two ago, and which I thought was amusing. Don't have to read into that, but there's definitely, he has a very strong anti-Israel bias. Let's just say that.
Yes, he does.
And how justified that is, we can debate. But that's just a feature of his output, and I just find myself, I wind up finding myself listening to this because there's nothing else on. But it's just amazing how durable this narrative is and how it just grinds on year after year.
Yeah, essentially that Israel is running the United States.
Exactly. And well, I don't doubt there's a lot of influence, but it just seems such a leap to me. Here's the point I was trying to go. So if you're talking about the whole Israel question, if you talk to Jews is, Israel's this tiny little island surrounded by enemies about to be overrun.
Yes.
Right? If you talk to Americans, Israel is this, juggernaut in the Middle East about to take over the entire Middle East. Right?
Yeah.
Where I think, the truth is just probably squarely in the middle.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Without having done any
there's truth to both.
Yeah. So anyway, without having done any, I'm just a casual observer of all of this, but I don't know why I find it so interesting, but I do find it interesting.
Yeah, it is, because you can recognize why people would come to completely different perspectives on the question. And so one doesn't have to, if preferable, get activated. Okay, here's my question. How do you deal with the widespread sense of victimhood on the right? So, for example, my position is if someone has 1 ounce more victimhood than I think appropriate, then I think they're a loser. But if they have 1 ounce less victimhood than I think is appropriate, then I think they're denying reality. So I recognize my own hypocrisy and frailty here. But how do you deal with right-wing claims of victimization?
I have some sympathy, especially when I hear a lot of the normalization of anti-white rhetoric in this dominant media. I think is a cause for legitimate concern, and it's real, and people are wise to pay attention to it and object to it. But what gives me, but it's tempered by the fact that there's a certain video game culture and this sort of blasé attitude towards skill acquisition that occurs about a lot of these right-wing pundits, and I don't realize the extent to which they're sacrificing their future. So when I was in my 20s, all I could think about was skill acquisition, and I had to forego a lot of entertainment in pursuit of skill acquisition. And I think a lot of these bloggers, these online personalities, a huge percentage of life is occupied by video games and drug consumption. And if that's what you do, the fate that awaits you is much more unforgiving than you're presently appreciating. That would be my message.
And do you have any thoughts on this incident from my life in therapy about 10 years ago? My therapist said, you think maybe you're so radical in your politics because you're so passive in your life. And at the time, 10 years ago, I wasn't really taking concrete steps to get my life on the right track, but I was all into this fascination with the growing alt-right.
I think yes. I think it's good that you were able to sort of recognize that pattern. I think I was about like 25, 26 when I just stopped being interested in politics. So I said, sort of have an intuition that my obsession with politics and however correct my arguments wasn't advancing my skills. There were, and this phrase like money talks and bullshit walks, and like at the end of the day, if you want people to pay you, you have to give them something that they need, and that just I allowed that thought to sort of put all of my political ranting to bed. And I think a lot of people need to hear that message and act on it.
Yeah.
And even the small amount of time that I was really intensely involved with politics, I really look back on and regret. Because this was like age like 20, 21, 22. And those are vital years. If I had not done that and applied myself more vigorously to my career and skill acquisition, I think I'd be a lot further ahead than I am today.
Yes.
And, so if my message to my younger self would have been to ixnay on the politics pay. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But it's not to say that you shouldn't pay attention to politics either. And I just can't believe how naive I was and how all-encompassing politics could be. You can in the internet age, you can eat as much politics in content as you want, right?
Yeah.
But when I was younger, you basically had a couple of magazines, cable news, and that's it, But now you could totally absorb yourself in it 24/7.
Yeah.
And I think that's a real liability for a lot of people who don't have the guidance to think, to evaluate that decision objectively.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Anything else you want to add?
No, that's it, bro.
Thanks,
Quick one
bro.
tonight.
Okay.
Sure.
Thanks. Blessings. Okay. Here's another thought from Regan, my new favorite thinker, and it's been a couple of months since my favorite thinker has been a female. But Regan Arntz-Grey says, men value high incomes in their partners less than women do. Women do not get the same social or romantic rewards when they bring home large salaries, so they're able to pursue work that they find interesting, meaningful, and that fits with their schedule without significant cost to their mating market value. So if as a society we start seeing STEM jobs, meaning science and technology jobs, as more meaningful, more helpful to others, they'll get more competitive, all right? But women prefer jobs that bring meaning. Right, so there's male bias in many professions, much of it a reflection of small sex differences in ability and interest, which lead to large differences at the tail. Changing the vibes doesn't lower the demands associated with motherhood. If these jobs became more competitive, how are moms going to keep up and rise to senior positions? Very hard to change vibe for STEM jobs. It requires a general pro-capitalist shift in the culture, capitalism versus socialism, hardly new debates. Many women choose nonprofits and care professions due to the vibes, but these vibes are partly the result of more egalitarian-style workplaces. Women are more drawn to jobs based on how the jobs make them feel, rather than based on how they theoretically contribute to the world. And she is responding to a post that says, women value meaning or doing what is considered socially valuable more than men. Consequently, they are willing to accept what are usually lower salaries to pursue such professions.
Change her presumed professed changes is, will people think she's a phony? Or will she backslide to the left? Or will there be word salad? But I think there's an additional issue, which is to actually explain them in a way that is credible and substantive. Almost by definition means that the left will be disappointed. There's no explanation you can give for being in favor of fracking that the left will say, well, that's convincing. And so, as I said, let's watch closely in the interview for that.
Okay.